Neil Armstrong had a strange encounter while on the moon, and he kept it hidden from everyone else for over 50 years. The Apollo 11 commander is among NASA legends when it comes to space travel, due to the feat he accomplished when he became the first man to set foot on the moon's surface on July 20, 1969. We are all aware of this historical experience, but there is one event in particular that was hidden from the public. While on the moon, Armstrong encountered something that almost prevented the Apollo 11 mission from returning home, which he kept secret until his death. What did the first man on the moon hide from us? The first landing on the moon has slowly become the realm of American mythology. This achievement was so amazing that the decade of travel was funneled into a single event. It almost seems as if on a summer day in 1969, 3 men boarded a rocket, traveled to the moon, donned their space suits, walked around, and planted the American flag before heading home. However, that was not all that happened. Neil Armstrong found something that he kept secret, but it was eventually revealed when he died. Before Neil Armstrong could take his one small step for man on July 20, 1969, he and the rest of the Apollo 11 crew went through a rigorous training process to prepare for their lunar mission. Although much of their training took place in test facilities and in the classroom, NASA also assigned astronauts tasks such as collecting geological samples. They also trained to get in and out of the lunar lander to help build muscle memory to replicate these procedures on the moon. To make the team's training as realistic as possible, the crew trained at selected sites here on Earth that eerily resembled the topography of the moon. NASA was searching for locations similar to the moon, and astronauts trained at various locations in the US and abroad to learn the geologic features they would encounter on their mission. The field training was highlighted because NASA wanted astronauts to learn muscle memory steps to collect samples and take pictures without wasting time. They practiced collecting and analyzing soil and rock samples at multiple sites, as well as digging trenches and collecting samples at different levels. Selecting locations and collecting samples, they practiced describing geological features verbally and in writing, documenting sites with photographs, and labeling samples. NASA made analog missions a regular training tool for astronauts. During the Apollo 11 landing, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin faced a problem when the computer indicated an error code 1202 and they did not know its source. Controllers in Houston searched for the problem as stress grew on the lunar module. Communication was failing, the computer was having problems, and the flight director was concerned about the lack of power from the control center. The problem started after the separation of the command module, with radio link problems. The flight director admitted to making decisions about how much information was enough. The order to begin powered descent and rocket brake landing was given, but communication was lost. Aldrin tried to fix the problem, but the radio connection kept failing. If the situation worsened, the mission would have to be aborted. Meanwhile, several alarms went off in the lunar module cockpit, including the O2 alarm indicating an overload. If the landing computer was reset due to this alarm, they would have to abort the mission instantly. Flight controllers on Earth were dealing with communication problems and intermittent radar data. During the lunar landing, the computer received too much data, which caused an unknown alarm in the lunar module. Flight controllers on Earth made the decision to proceed with the landing as long as the alarm did not repeat itself constantly. Despite another similar alarm, the astronauts went ahead with the landing, with Aldrin focused on the instruments and Armstrong manually controlling the landing. However, a new problem arose. Its location was not as planned. Armstrong said to start the descent with jet, but then we lost communication. Aldrin tried to fix it, but to no avail. If it got worse, we would have to abort. The master alarm sounded and the landing computer indicated an oxygen overload. During the landing, Neil Armstrong asked Houston for clarification about the alarm that was sounding in the cockpit. Mission controller Steve Bales decided it was safe to proceed as long as the alarm was erratic. They decided to continue the landing, as it was almost as dangerous to try to abort with a faulty computer as it was to continue. Fellow astronaut Charlie Duke beamed the message into space saying we are continuing that alarm. Despite the fact that the computer issued another alarm, they decided to continue. During the landing, Buzz Aldrin was focused on the instrument displays and Armstrong was in manual control of the landing. However, another problem was slowly beginning to appear. They were not where they were supposed to be. Aldrin remembered that in the commander's window there was a grid calibrated at Armstrong's height that allowed him to check his position on the moon. However, the irregular gravitation of the moon and the extra speed they gained when they disengaged from the command module caused them to overshoot their planned landing zone. Armstrong had a bad view of a vast field of craters and truck-sized rocks instead of the smooth, flat area shown on the orbital map. Manually piloting, he searched for a soft place to land. During the lunar landing, Armstrong and his crew were nervous due to the strange trajectory and low fuel level, which meant they had to abort in 60 seconds. Armstrong searched for a soft spot while Aldrin called out speed and range. After landing, the crew went through their checklist, but a buildup of pressure was observed on the consoles. The situation was reported and they considered aborting the mission, but the heat from the engine melted the ice and the problem was resolved. After 3 hours on the moon, Armstrong and Aldrin attempted to open the lunar module's hatch after completing their checklist. However, they discovered that they could not get all the air out of the lander, and that there was still too much pressure. After several tries, Aldrin had to peel the edge of the hatch to get it open without breaking it. As Armstrong was leaving the module, something snapped. It turned out to be the ascent motor arming switch, presenting another dangerous problem for the mission. Buzz Aldrin noticed something unusual on the floor of the lunar module as he prepared to go out on the lunar surface. He discovered it was a broken circuit breaker that had come loose from the ascent motor's arming vital switch. He realized that either he or Armstrong must have accidentally hit the switch with their large backpacks while trying to get out of the lunar module door. The circuit breaker was broken and needed to be pushed back so the ascent motor could fire up and get them home. Houston could not find a solution. Aldrin inserted a pen into the broken circuit breaker opening to push it in and hold it in place. Had the engine arming circuit breaker not closed, Armstrong and Aldrin would have been trapped on the moon. If the pen hadn't worked, Mission Control and the crew would have looked for other ways to close the circuit to start the ascent motor. After Buzz Aldrin fixed the broken circuit breaker with a felt-tip pen during the Apollo 11 mission, it was decided to keep a guard on those breakers on later lunar modules. Impromptu as the arrangement was, the ascent motor fired successfully and the astronauts were able to return to Earth. Aldrin still keeps the broken switch and the pen he used. In contrast, Neil Armstrong kept a bag full of small parts of the Eagle lunar module, which was found in one of his closets after his death in 2012. The storage bag was found by his widow and given to the National Air and Museum, Space in Washington. The curator of space artifacts found Neil Armstrong's McDivitt satchel exciting, which contained valuables from the lunar mission such as the lanyard, equipment mounts, lights and an emergency wrench. It also had the optical sight and camera that recorded iconic images of the lunar landing. Armstrong kept the bag secret for more than 40 years, although the bag and its contents were moved to the command module before the lander was crash-landed on the lunar surface, to prevent its destruction. It is unknown how Armstrong obtained the bag after the mission. Saving space capsule pieces as souvenirs was not unusual, but this and other incidents during the mission could have caused problems. It is unknown why Neil Armstrong hid the space mission artifacts, even from his wife. It's also mentioned that Armstrong and his team on the moon broke some rules by bouncing off a part of the moon to take pictures of some interesting rocks. which raises the question of what would happen if those photos turned out to be of extraterrestrial origin.